Yeah, nice to meet you, everybody. Um, my name is Chad Sanderson, and I'm joined by Daniel Dicker. We work on the Convoy data platform team, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. But we started using Convoy just over a year ago now, like right around a year ago, using Amundsen, sorry. um, just over a year ago. And we've had a lot of success not only implementing, but also onboarding our data consumers, our internal customers to Amundsen. And they've seen a lot of value out of it. So we're going to talk about how we did that and how we made the decision and which problems we're solving and some of the implementation thoughts that we have and where we're looking to take Amundsen into the future. So a little bit about Convoy, if you haven't heard of the company. We are a digital freight network or a digital freight brokerage. Essentially, we operate a two-sided B2B marketplace where on one side of the marketplace, we have shippers like Walmart and Starbucks and Niagara. And then on the other side of the marketplace, we have carriers, which are companies that own the trucks which take the freight. Convoy sits in the middle and provides an application to both the shippers to sort of monitor the status of their freight, and also the carriers in the form of an app where they can, there's an auction and they can bid on freight. And we're able to intelligently offer freight depending on where that trucker is going and where they live and what their normal routes are and things like that. So the idea is the more efficient that we can make trucking for everybody, everyone wins. There's a lot of empty miles in trucking. So that's truckers who have a load one way, but as they're coming back the other way, maybe they're returning home from their drop-off destination, they're empty, which means they're not earning money and they're not being very efficient. And that's something that Convoy is looking to change. So in terms of the data platform team, we own the end-to-end data stack at Convoy. In general, Convoy is about a 1,000-person business. Our product engineering organization is somewhere between, fluctuates between 250 and 300 people, and that's designers, data scientists, and engineers. We sort of monitor and own and manage everything from the data layer, so like storage and computation, Snowflake, ETL, things like that, all the way up to the application layer. So this is experimentation, and we have an internal machine learning platform and things like that. So this is the list of all the stuff that we own here on the left. Test Drive is the name of our internal A/B testing tool. ML platform is we have a self-hosted ECS-based machine learning deployment framework. We have a feature repository that we built in-house, a metrics repository where a data scientist can define, create SQL definitions for aggregations that they care about and they want to use downstream in reports and in experiments and things like that. The data warehouse, obviously, all of our data visualization tools, and then also data discovery. This is a lot of stuff. We're a relatively small team. There's around 17 people in the team right now, including myself as the product lead, our engineers, data engineers, and then 2 engineering managers. But the small size of the team has actually worked out pretty well, I think. We've been able to really take ownership of the entire pipeline and think of things from a data product perspective. And when we see gaps, we can attack those gaps. So I'm going to pass things over to Daniel, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the gaps that we saw, which led us to make the investment in Amundsen.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. So we kind of started our data discovery journey in earnest at the beginning of 2020. At the time, data discovery was an incredibly kind of time-consuming and very manual process. we send out quarterly surveys to the data science organization. And at the beginning of 2020, one of the biggest issues affecting productivity was data discovery. We have a bunch of tables. People don't know what's in them. People don't know how to use them. There was a lot of duplication of effort to kind of create very similar tables and similar queries to get answers. It was very time consuming to share information about what was in the data warehouse and how to use that. We leverage dbt pretty heavily at Convoy. And dbt does come with some nice documentation features. But the process tends to be, we have all of our dbt models checked into a central repository. When people are creating new tables or updating existing tables, they typically added documentation there. That goes through a PR process and then gets merged into the master branch, where it then gets deployed. But oftentimes people would just want to make small adjustments to just like the documentation side. And the overhead of creating a PR, getting it reviewed and getting it merged was more time consuming of a process than people wanted it to be. There was a lot of overhead. People kind of didn't feel like the juice was worth the squeeze to go ahead and document it. Additionally, there were tools that we had implemented previously that that solved parts of the kind of knowledge problem about what was in the data warehouse, but they had kind of incomplete knowledge and incomplete features. So we had built an internal Shiny app to basically crawl all the dbt models and what was in the data warehouse to try and figure out information around that. We had deployed the kind of built-in dbt documentation site that you get for free with dbt. And there was a ton of conversations continuing to happen in Slack around like, hey, I'm looking for this piece of information. Where does that live? Our Slack channel was just filled with similar questions to that. And because it was time intensive to kind of properly document things, and we had these tools that didn't quite get at everything that people wanted, there ended up being a lot of institutional knowledge around Convoy. People would have there would be these silos of information about, well, I would know my component of the company relatively well, but if I tried to go out of my lane to analyze something that wasn't necessarily in my wheelhouse, there was a lot of time spent trying to understand how to use that data. We also work in the logistics industry, which, at least to me, was way more complicated than I expected going in. The life cycle of a shipment has a lot of moving pieces to it. The freight industry as a whole and kind of how they operate has a lot of interesting but varied facets to it. And so it was very difficult for any single person to kind of have a holistic view of what Convoy's data model actually is and how to relate that to the tables in the data warehouse and kind of how to join that. And all of these things would be maybe manageable if we could, freeze Convoy exactly as it was, and we never did anything different. But our business is constantly growing and changing. We're constantly launching new programs. We are tweaking existing programs. And so the knowledge around how to use these tables, what is in these tables, is constantly growing and changing. Next slide. So we wanted to implement a solution that did a couple of things. We wanted to, first and foremost, lower the barrier to entry for adding useful information. So if someone came across a piece of documentation that was incorrect or was missing information, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for someone to go in and add that information. The second is we wanted to improve the search functionality. So we wanted to be able to give users a tool where they could find relevant information to what they were looking for. And also, we wanted to add more useful information and context around the data. So not just like what are the tables in the data warehouse and what are the columns, but also who is using those tables, who is the owner of those tables, what are the queries that are getting run against those tables, and things like that. And lastly, from a technology standpoint, we wanted something that provided a good foundation to build additional features as we were kind of going in expecting that as Convoy grew and changed, we would probably want our data discovery tool to do the same. Next slide. So we ended up choosing Amundsen. We really liked the feature set. It hit most of what we were looking for just right out of the box. It was also built on familiar technologies. So the data science side of Convoy does kind of use Python extensively. We are a TypeScript shop as well, and React. So that played nicely with kind of what Amundsen was offering. And then we were also excited with how quickly Amundsen was growing and the kind of big community that was kind of springing up around it. And so out of the box, we implemented Amundsen. But before we kind of launched it to users, there were a couple things we knew we wanted to build on top of it. Part of it was to reach feature parity with the existing data discovery tools. And it was also, we wanted to address kind of things that we had pain points with in the past, and we just wanted to build solutions so that when we launched this new tool, it had a bunch of what people were looking for. So first and foremost, we built some integration with dbt. As I mentioned, Convoy is heavily uses dbt. So we built a initial dbt data builder to basically suck in information from dbt, things like ownership, lineage, information around like the raw and or the dbt SQL and the kind of compiled SQL that we could just go ahead and display in Amundsen without having the need for someone to jump to another tool to be able to see that information. We also built an integration with Metabase. Convoy uses Metabase pretty heavily for our visualization layer. And so we built an integration there. And we also built in Mixpanel into Amundsen for kind of analytics tracking to see how we were doing at adoption. Next slide.
So that's the implementation journey. But as I think a lot of people on this call probably know, when you're rolling out a brand new data tool, that's half the battle is the technology, and then the other half the battle is getting people to change their current usage patterns and do something new and migrate away. And sometimes that's very easy to do if the entire organization is bought in, but the data science team and the P&E team at Convoy, like I said, is pretty large for our size. So being able to get it into the hands of all of our data scientists and sort of have that flywheel effect of value took some planning. So there's a few ways that we went about doing this. The first thing is we pinpointed a few key stakeholders from the very beginning that were senior data scientists and researchers that had some sway elsewhere in the company. We worked through them, sort of defining what their problems around data discovery were, and they became our beta customers when we actually rolled out a solution, and they were sort of our some of the loudest voices when we actually moved to a migration. The other thing that we did was schedule a documentation day. We worked this out with our data science leadership, and then also all of the DS managers. Was basically a 3-hour time block where data scientists stopped everything that they were doing and focused primarily on documentation, making sure that tables and columns had descriptions and owners, so that the tool, that Amundsen was very fleshed out and people would get a lot of value in it when they go to use it for the first time. It also had the effect of if you get the entire organization sort of using this tool and getting them hands-on with it, it sort of overcomes that initial friction of having to adopt something new. So that was something else that was pretty valuable. And the winner, so Convoy uses the pod model. where each pod is a relatively constrained problem set that's being tackled by a few engineers and data scientists, product manager, designer, things like that. And the winning pod, so whoever added the most metadata to Amundsen would get like a $200 Amazon gift card. And the result is that we had over 100 people that became pretty familiar with the tool, joined the Amundsen Slack channel that we set up, and gave us really good feedback around Amundsen in general. We had 750 BI columns, descriptions that were updated, which is one of our schemas, and then another 150 columns in our core schema that were updated with descriptions as well. So this was pretty big. This was the most any of our data warehouse had been documented, and then on top of that, we had a whole bunch of people using Amundsen right out of the gate, which was nice. So at this point, about 80% of our total P&E team has used Amundsen over this last year. We have around 4,500 searches every single month for tables or columns. And we have a really wide range of usage as well. So it's not just our data science team, our product management team uses Amundsen as well, program managers, and even the ops managers who are actually outside of our P&E team, they actually use Amundsen quite heavily as well, and we're still growing. So there's a few folks in finance that are starting to use it, and the sort of incremental adoption elsewhere in the company. So the feedback that we got was also very, very good. Here's some examples. There were some situations where Amundsen went down, and George is a data scientist on a team called Boost that's focusing on sort of a new, like brand new products and things like that. And this was his comment when it went down. It's only when you lose something you realize how much you actually need it. And this was kind of a sentiment that was echoed by the rest of the data science team. And this guy, I realize this is a bad screenshot here, but Tim Graciano is actually one of the data science leads at Convoy. So when we were going through our quarterly planning process, we called out Amundsen as being a big win that we delivered over that quarter. And one of the things that Tim has mentioned, not just in this document, but elsewhere, is that the data science team really, really loves the tool and gets a ton of value out of it. So it has definitely been one of our larger wins as an organization. Sort of moving from DBT docs and Slack into Amundsen has saved a ton of time. So here's just a graph of some of the searches over time. You can sort of see back when we implemented Amundsen in June, we were getting a very small number of searches. That huge uplift is the documentation day that I mentioned. And we've pretty much continued that over time. Some of the dips that you're seeing really aren't due too much with like raw Amundsen uses, and more of just like churn within Convoy and time off and other things like that. Yeah, we still feel very good about the usage. So I'm going to turn it back over to Daniel for some of our upcoming plans around Amundsen and what else we intend to build on top of it.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of future plans for Amundsen, we've been very happy with it so far. We're very interested in incorporating data lineage and kind of indexing dashboards, especially Metabase, into Amundsen. On the data lineage part, because we have everything in DBT, we have that kind of lineage from table to table, and we're interested in kind of visualizing that, both from an understanding how your data kind of fits in the rest of the data warehouse and how data flows through the data warehouse. And also as like a debugging tool to say, if we have a problem in a particular table, what are the downstream impacts? If I'm making a change to this table, what are the downstream impacts, et cetera. In terms of indexing dashboards, we use Metabase pretty heavily, and it's a bit of a sprawl. So being able to search those dashboards to kind of find what are the key trusted resources that we have in these dashboards would be great. As Chad mentioned, part of what the data platform team owns is integration, or is a metrics repository and a feature repository that we've been working on. So we are looking forward to kind of integrating the information that is stored in those two repositories into Amundsen as well. We're also interested in incorporating features around like the table relativity, around like how can I link these two tables together, and importing a lot of those conversations that happen outside of Amundsen into Amundsen, conversations around how do I use this table, what are some gotchas around using the data in this table, things that I need to be aware of. I think the big theme for these last two are basically like, how can I provide more useful context for what is in my data warehouse to be able to like create efficient queries, get the information that I need, and pull information out in an accurate way.